This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. We've been making cheese in Wisconsin since before we were even a state, which may be one reason why we win so many awards for it. It's what happens when a whole state dreams in cheese. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hi, and welcome to A Taste of the Past. I'm your host, Linda Palacio, on this journey through culinary history. But first, listeners, I want to take a moment to talk to you about Heritage Radio Network, or HRN, as we like to call ourselves, and we're known now. It's the organization that produces this podcast. HRN is the only podcast network dedicated to food, beverages, and the culinary world. It's also nonprofit, and it educates emerging food storytellers. There are no paywalls for you to hurdle. HRN brings listeners free podcasts on everything from like this, culinary history, or the artistry of baking to the craft of brewing, or the complexities of cheesemongering to the challenges of farming in these times of climate change. So we need your help. We would love to have HRN thrive and have you help us by going to heritageradionetwork.org/donate and making a donation to keep these food radio podcasts free and accessible. And now, on to today's show with my guest, Jody Eddy, author of the book Elysian Kitchens, Recipes Inspired by the Traditions and Tastes of the World's Sacred Spaces. Monasteries, temples, mosques, and synagogues, all these different sacred places, I would say organizations, but preserve not only the world's religions, but also cultural and culinary traditions. And those who cook in the kitchens of those sacred spaces, the sacred kitchens, are the keepers of the flame, if you will, cooking the traditions, the culinary heritage of recipes and foods from their respective places. And they are culinary innovators as well, keeping up with modern methods and tastes that reflect the world today. Jody Eddy took a rather special journey and visited many of these places, many in areas which today she probably wouldn't be able to get into and explore. Jody is a well-known author and cook with a rich and diverse background in the culinary world. She grew up in Minnesota, where she developed a love for cooking and food through fishing, gardening, and hunting with her grandfather, and learning to cook from her grandmother, and inspired to travel by her mother. After graduating with an English degree from the University of Minnesota, Jody moved to Seattle, where she immersed herself in the local food culture, including foraging, baking, brewing, and cheesemaking. Her passion for food led her to New York City, where she pursued her formal culinary training at the Institute of Culinary Education in Manhattan. She gained professional experience by cooking at prestigious establishments such as Jean-Georges and Table in New York and the Fat Duck in England. Jody's career took a significant turn when she became the executive editor of Art Culinaire magazine, where she was responsible for selecting topics featuring chefs and culinary personalities, writing editorial content, supervising photo shoots, and testing and editing recipes. Her work has been published in numerous esteemed publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Saveur, Travel and Leisure, and Food and Wine. Jody is the author of 8, or is it 9, Jody? Books now. 8, okay. Including, I'll name a couple that are particularly special to me. North, the New Nordic Cuisine of Iceland, which was a James Beard nominated book. Come In, We're Closed, an invitation to staff meals at the world's best restaurants. Was that the IACP winner?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And now her newest, Elysian Kitchens, recipes inspired by the traditions and tastes of the world's sacred spaces. And Jody, welcome. I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Thank you, Linda. I'm so happy to be talking with you. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to it.
This was quite a venture that you took on. And I mean, what? Okay, I'm going to ask the chicken or the egg question. What what inspired you to write this book?
I had this period of about 2 to 3 months where I kept having experiences that basically made it inevitable that I would write a book proposal. I I was doing other projects in Spain, in Senegal, in India, and so I was in Spain, and I visited a monastery just because I was curious. And when I talked with the monk there, he had been a former investment banker from Barcelona, which I thought was an interesting career trajectory. And then he
Yeah.
mentioned, and then he mentioned that he's often approached by chefs who want to come and learn about his gardening program. They want to come and work in the culinary school, and he would say to them, "Well, do you want to be a monk?" They were like, "No, I just want to do kind of an apprenticeship," and of course he'd have to turn them away. But I thought it was really interesting, that chefs seem to be curious about this. And then when I was in Senegal, I was at a monastery for another project, and the food was incredible. And the monk, when I mentioned to him, like, "You are so talented," he said, "Well, I trained at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris." And then I was at Tikse, which is a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in the Himalayas and of India. And one of the monks was wearing a Yankees cap, and I let him know that I lived in New York for years and loved the Yankees, and through a translator. But he said, "Oh, and I love New York. I travel there all the time. My favorite thing to do is eat a knish." And and then I was, and all of these experiences just made me feel like, well, these aren't dusty relics of the past. These monks are of the world. They're very aware of what's happening. They're connected to the culinary world. And then I was at the MAD Symposium, which is Rene Redzepi's conference in Copenhagen, and I was talking to a few very well-known chefs, and they started to, I hadn't even brought up monasteries, and they started to talk about their monastic culinary experiences, and they were almost like trying to outdo each other in who learned more from the monks and the nuns that they worked with. And this all happened within 2 to 3 months. And I thought, okay, I think there is something here. But I wanted the book, I didn't want to just focus on one religion. I wanted it to be as expansive as possible. And so there are many different kinds of spirituality represented in the book, but that through line is kind of this, the culinary traditions from the past, and also what's carrying them through to the future.
Right. Well, each place has such a wonderful story. And I must mention that, Jody, you have lived in so many different places all over the world. So for you to be going to all these different places and discovering their different traditions it's not that far out, because, for instance, right now we're talking to you from Portugal, right?
That's right. Yes.
So, you have lived in Iceland and Ireland and Spain and
Prague.
Prague. Okay.
Before Portugal, I was in Prague for 3 years. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was my question to that end, was that how did you choose the places you visited, which you pretty much just covered, was by talking to a lot of people and your past experiences. But how were you granted access? Because, as you mentioned, the one person was turned away until he became a monk.
Yes.
How did you gain access to a lot of these places?
That is a big question, Linda. It was the challenge of the book, for sure.
An example, perhaps.
No. I think that question is just so spot on, in the sense of, a lot of the places were cloistered. So they had cloistered kitchens, and, the photographer, Kristen Teig, she's female, I'm female. So that was an issue. Like, we're not, we don't let females into the cloistered kitchens. But then some other issues were, like in Japan, I covered a Zen Buddhist monastery in Japan, and they had just never let anyone photograph their kitchen. And it's where Zen Buddhism was introduced to Japan. So it's, centuries old. And I had my friend Name Shinobu, who's a chef in Tokyo. He has a restaurant called L'Effervescence, but he also studies monastic cuisine. And so Name, he wrote probably 20 letters. I would write the letters to the monastery explaining the project and how we were going to treat it with dignity and respect. And Nami would translate them and send them off to the monastery. But it took about a year when we finally gained access. And then I covered the Sufis in Morocco, in Fez, and my friend Tara Stevens, who's a food writer. She's a British food writer, but she has a culinary school in Fez. She was the one who opened that door. In Lebanon, Kamal Mouzawak, who has this incredible food advocacy program called Souk El Tayeb. Kamal opened the door in Lebanon. So, and then as we moved forward, as the monasteries were seeing that we were treating this project with respect, that we really deeply cared about it, then they started helping me get the doors to other monasteries opened. They would lecture us. And so that was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. You covered how many? 11 different monasteries altogether.
Yeah.
Well, that Japanese one you talked about, pronounce that for me, please.
Iheiji.
Yes. That turned out to be, they're all beautiful chapters, but that turned out to be quite a beautiful chapter, that one in particular.
Yes. That was an incredible experience. Just watching the monks, the Tenzo, who's the chef of the monastery, just prepare his food so meticulously. But I also was pleasantly surprised. It was a huge kitchen, and the monastery is so orderly, and ritual is so important. But that was a busy kitchen. There was foot traffic. There was some chaos. Just anything you'd see in a huge production kitchen like that, I was seeing there, which I found really gratifying somehow. But then they ate in a very ritualistic way, which was really incredible to document.
Yeah, well, I think I've also found that to be true with the Sikh monastery in New Delhi. That seemed to me to be like a huge, almost like hotel kitchen. Really,
absolutely.
A lot of cooking going on. Not what you think of as this ritualistic, but it's still ritualistic, but not such a focused one dish at a time type place.
Well, the Sikh gurdwaras that they have all over the world, they're really incredible in the sense of anyone who needs a meal or wants a meal can come they serve usually 3 meals a day. And there are thousands of people who come for their meals. And the food is almost always prepared by volunteers who then also serve the meals. And then sometimes, the people who are receiving the meals, they'll cook for the dinner. And it's just this really beautiful kind of symbiotic process that they have that is just so rooted in philanthropy, and compassion for one another. So but that one actually was very easy to gain access. We didn't have to gain access to that one. They're so busy. There are dozens and dozens of cooks, and there's so much chaos that they were like, we don't care if you photograph this experience. That's fine. We won't even notice you.
So you were just trailing like you would in some sort of big popular kitchen in a restaurant.
Absolutely. Right? Which was so liberating, just to walk around and do whatever we needed to do. So that was great.
So what was the smallest, most focused type experience that you came across that you worked with?
I guess one of the experiences that was most unique was we covered Masbia, which is run by the Jewish rabbi Alex Rappaport. And Masbia, if New Yorkers are probably familiar, it's a food pantry and a kitchen in 3 different boroughs in New York City. And their mission, their goal is to serve people with dignity, so they can. They don't take names when people come to eat a meal to make, that can be degrading. But you come and your table is set and you just come for your beautiful, nutritious meal. And so I think that was a very special and unique experience, just working with the volunteers there. And then just learning as well. Alex's brother is a kosher cook in New Jersey. So, we did a lot of kosher cooking. And so that was I really enjoyed that experience. And I thought that
Yeah.
it was unique to the other experiences that we had.
Right. And so as far as a lot of the heritage cooking and recipes, I think of Tikse, I'm saying that right,
Yeah.
in Ladakh.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. The Tibetan monastery. There it's I found that your writing and the experience was more food focused, the actual dishes and the cooking. And tell me, the recipes are just so wonderful. But they all the recipes are as beautifully photographed as they are tasting. The couple that I've made, but then but just looking and reading them and what great recipes they are. But tell me a bit about the Tikse experience.
I'm glad.
How did you get there, first of all?
I know. Well, and because I had been there once, we had to go back once I had the book deal. So it was like I was there, and it's like, okay, now I'm returning to Tikse so we can document this. So, yeah. And just a side note, the first time I went there, the person that I went with convinced me to not fly in or fly out of Ladakh. And so we drove from Leh, which is the capital of Ladakh, to Manali. And it was a 24-hour drive over the highest drivable mountain pass in the world. And so I did reassure Kristen, the photographer, that we were going to be flying in and out.
No. That's why I because I read your account of that hair raising drive, and I and I thought, oh my goodness, that would a lot.
And actually, that was the first time I was there. I wasn't doing the book, so I didn't feel pressure, that I didn't have access to the monastery. But
Right.
I was in a market in Leh, and I asked one of the. I was with a translator, but I asked a monk that I saw in the market, which would be the best monastery to cover, and he pointed to Tikse, and I could see it up on the mountaintop. It's like, well, Tikse, and I said, well, how do we get there? How should we gain access? And he said, well, if you have a car, just drive there or walk. But
the
monks, but the monks were always so inviting there, and it was nice because I was going back a second time, and I had cooked with them the first time, and I thought, I wonder if they'll remember me. It's been maybe 3 or 4 years, but several of the monks did remember. So that was really nice because I felt like I had this long-standing relationship with them. But I wasn't that familiar with Tibetan cuisine before Tikse, but I cannot get enough of it. Like there's thukpa, which is it's essentially, Tibetan chicken noodle soup, but it's just so comforting, loaded with turmeric. And they serve it with sapin, which is this really fiery hot sauce. And then there's a condiment that I must have in my fridge at all times, no matter where I am. It's called son labu, and it's daikon It's simple: daikon radish, red radish, Thai chili, some Szechuan peppercorns, and it's pickled. But the radishes remain really crispy, and because of the red radish color, it's this gorgeous pink color, and I love that. And I could go on and on about Tibetan cuisine because it's so fortifying and comforting and so flavorful.
Well, that when I was talking about in your bio about your initial experience right after college, foraging and gardening. Well, now so many of these sacred places do their own gardening, or they forage, or they're really hands-on with how the food is produced, what they can't get at markets, or they produce all their own and then trade the goods.
Yeah.
That must have been just a wonderful experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when I was writing the book proposal, I did because most of these places, a lot of them have several types of food and beverage production, but some of them have production that is just very well known. And so I do highlight, 1 or 2 of those processes in every chapter, because in the proposal, I talked about how, everyone is fermenting, making cheese, brewing beer, making wine, whatever we're doing today. It's like, well, they've been doing this for centuries and have perfected it at these locations. And so that was really fascinating. But I also liked how, we were at a monastery in Quebec, Canada, and I knew they make cheese at this monastery and preserves that are known all throughout Canada. And
Saint Benoit du Lac.
exactly. And I assumed, when you hear cheese production at the monastery, you just think, wow, it's going to be this gorgeous, artistic photo shoot. It's going to be so beautiful. But it was a high end industrial cheese making facility. And initially it was disappointing, but just aesthetically, but, in talking to the monk who runs it, he's like, we had to evolve. We used to have that type of system, but to survive, we have to evolve and work in step with the modern world. And so that to me became, a really beautiful thing that they were changing to keep their traditions alive, but also to thrive in our contemporary world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that was I wanted to ask you about the material culture of the kitchens, and that were there any that I know a lot of them, they talk about the recipes because you say, well, and then you would describe one of the, monks or priests or whoever was cooking or the people there. Oh, and they use a food processor and they, and they're the ovens and the refrigerators. Any kitchens that you ran across which were pretty much, a holdout, right? Like the open fire cooking and things were still pretty rustic?
Just in thinking, I think, at St. Anthony in Lebanon, it's a 4th century monastery. Certainly they were using modern, appliances as well, but they had a lot of techniques that they were doing there, like their stills for arak production were still heated, by fire and by wood. And, they've probably been doing it the same way since the 4th century. And so definitely there, we did witness a lot of that style of cooking, where it was a blend though of, contemporary, but they're also cooking for a huge crowd, and there was one cook there. So he needed those modern conveniences, but definitely, I think most of the locations are really adhering to what tradition dictates and what has been done there for centuries often. So even if they're adding in, something more contemporary and more efficient, there's always that nod to tradition.
Sure. Yeah. That was an interesting story about the St. Anthony's in Lebanon. You don't think of it being St. Anthony's and then it's in Lebanon, but the Maronite. The people who were there, Maronite Catholic, which is, as I say, that was one of the places you'd have a hard time getting to today. Tell me a little bit about that. That has some interesting people in there.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, my friend Kamal Mouzawak was really the facilitator for our visit. And his organization, Souk El Tayeb, has a restaurant and a hotel in Beirut. So we were in Beirut and he said, well, tomorrow there's a driver and you'll go to Byblos. And Byblos is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. And he said, you'll go to Byblos and you'll meet the monk who will be your guide at this pastry shop. And so we went, and I have to admit, I was not that familiar with the Maronites, but they precede Roman Catholicism, of course, being in the region they are, but they're also affiliated with Roman Catholicism. But then the monk drove us up through Mount Lebanon, which is where they say King Solomon sourced his cedar trees, and it's full of cedar trees. And then he stopped and we were in the Kadisha Valley, and he pointed to the monastery in the distance in the valley, just kind of clinging to the mountain. It was the monastic image that you want. It was so beautiful. And but they still have at that monastery hermitages. And so I met Father Johnny, and he had actually been in his hermitage for 40 years. Very elderly man, so lovely. And our guide was translating for us. But he had returned from his hermitage very recently, and he ate lunch with us. And when I asked him why he had decided to leave after 4 decades, because even his food delivery, they would bring food to his hut, but they wouldn't have any contact with him. They would just leave his food and they would walk away. And he said, I came back because I missed my friends. And I realized that community is more important than my study of my spirituality, and that I can do that in community. And so I returned just to be surrounded by my friends again. And I just thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's true of all of these different locations that you went to, is that they are, well, as a monastery or temple. I think of mosques and monasteries, more community. I guess temples there are as well. That you do. It's all about the community.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
There was one in that was a particular, the Sufi mosque in Morocco.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was an interesting story with background of people in there too.
Yes.
So can you tell me about that one?
Yeah. So we couldn't visit a mosque, being female, but we therefore cooked and prayed and chanted and meditated in something called a zawiya, which is a Sufi gathering place. And it was the zawiya that we were graciously invited into. It was run by a Sufi. His name is Jonathan Friedman. And he had actually been, he was born Jewish in Montreal. And he decided to become a Sufi. And he actually, I don't know if he runs it anymore, but he opened a restaurant in Montreal called Rumi, because the poet Rumi is probably the most famous Sufi. So when we were there, I love the idea of the Zawiya, which is something, a theme we saw over and over again, just kind of this open door policy. So while we were there were Sufis from Britain who were staying there, and they sleep there and they cook there and they work together. And, as Jonathan talked about, Rumi's importance in their teachings and their learnings today, and they have such a belief that if that food needs to be prepared by people who infuse it with a positive energy, and that how it's grown is so important, and how it's prepared. And so it's not just that it's grown, in a non-GMO environment, or that it's organic, but it's about the mindset of the people who are taking care of the food every step of the way. And there's a transference of that energy to the people who consume it. And there was so much a sense of gratitude for what we experienced and what we ate. And it was really beautiful.
I was impressed with the recipes from that experience as well. The tagines that they would prepare. And surprised that there was meat introduced in a couple of them, but primarily vegetarian, but there was meat introduced in some of them. But the tagine that was looked so wonderful. That was mostly, I think, just chickpea and lentil. Almost like a falafel, kind of cooked in a wonderful sauce. Yeah.
And we actually, for that as well, because on Fridays, Muslim communities often offer couscous to the community. And so we actually had an experience too, where we went out in Morocco and we learned how to make couscous from wheat harvest to final production to eating a tagine. And that was really incredible.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is great.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, The tradition of cheesemaking excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheesemaking traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheesemaking culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheesemaking craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
I'm trying to think of some recipes that really impressed me. They all impressed me. But I guess maybe it was the one in Spain, poblet.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm trying to think tell me, do you remember offhand? Oh, I know. Is that the
paella there, and
cannelloni, where they have to make the
cannelloni, right? Yeah, a very rich bechamel sauce.
Yes, and stuffing as well.
Yeah, Poblet is really special in that it's a 11th century UNESCO World Heritage Site. They have wine production, almonds, olives, just incredible food production. Tomato, they dry tomatoes there in this really unique way, but they also have a culinary school.
That was it.
Yeah,
yes.
It's run by a monk. Well, we were there, but I assume he's still in charge. He was so fantastic. A monk from Bolivia, and the school is for disenfranchised students in the community, and so
excuse me, I just want to mention that this is in Tarragona, Spain. Correct?
Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And so. Yeah, the students, the training is free, and they learn everything they would in a culinary school, and they receive degrees, and then they help them with job placement. And then they're also, because Poblet is this incredibly beautiful monastery, so there's a lot of tourism there. You can actually stay there as well. So the students are also preparing a lot of the dishes that are served in the restaurants there. So it's a really beautiful setup that they have, and very inspiring. Once again, just kind of seeing this open door policy, and if people are in need, I really felt in so many of these locations that desire to help the community was very sincere.
Indeed. I think another one that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the monastery in Minnesota.
Yes, I would be remiss.
You being from Minnesota, I mean.
I'm so glad you brought it up, because my twin brother Ilrid at the monastery would not forgive me. So I didn't mention St. John's. And actually, I grew up about 20 minutes from this monastery, and I did grow up Catholic. But that was a monastery that we would go to on special events. So it was Christmas. We would go to like midnight mass there. And that monastery, they have something called Johnny bread, which is a cracked wheat bread that is sold all throughout the region. It's known everywhere, and it's, was coveted. And then they have honey production there, and they have maple syrup production there. And I really love St. John's in that it's thriving. So many of these places are, but they have, a male and female university, St. John's and St. Ben's. A lot of my friends went there. Actually,
this is a Benedictine.
Yes, exactly.
Monastery, right? Okay.
Yes. And so I think they're so industrious. And Brother Ilrid Sena, who I mentioned, he kind of takes care of everything, and he cooks these incredible meals, for the monks all throughout the week. But he's also, they have a vast garden, and he is making salsas, and he's so curious about food. And while I was writing Elysian Kitchens, I actually was writing another book called Chot that was published during the process of Elysian Kitchens. And Brother Ilrid, when he heard that I was writing Chot, he loved loved the chef that I wrote it with, Manit Chauhan. So he's like, can I recipe test some of those recipes with you? And I just thought, well, this is so strange, these two worlds colliding. But I also was living in Minnesota. I hadn't lived in Minnesota since college, but my grandma had Lewy body dementia. So I moved home to Minnesota for a few years to kind of be with her at the end. And so it was really nice that Kristen could visit Minnesota. And she actually came to lunches with my grandmother, which I so appreciated. And my grandma was actually at a memory care facility that's actually run by St. John's and St. Ben's. And yeah, but it was nice because we could visit that monastery throughout the seasons. We could have several visits because I was living there. So yeah, we became really familiar with the monks there, and really felt like we were part of that monastic life, which was really lovely.
Well, you speak of the monastic life and all of their industriousness. That's a big question that I had, and that's in all of these different various religious organizations and places and sacred kitchens, any commonalities that you feel they all shared? Like maybe it's a philosophy of food or cooking.
I mean, one thing that I think people might not associate, unless you start thinking about it, and you think, well, that makes sense. But so many of these locations, I almost consider the monks to be some of the first environmental stewards that we have, in terms of their, they've been seed saving and reducing food waste and for sometimes centuries, and cooking and eating locally, and just kind of trying to establish a symbiotic relationship, through food with the community. And so I saw that over and over again. And then certainly, the philanthropy that I mentioned, I witnessed that in almost every location in some capacity. And I think the importance of ritual and routine, this idea of we will gather every day, or 3 times a day sometimes for our meal. We'll sit around the table together, and they place a lot of importance on that and value. And certainly we saw that over in every location, and that was really heartening. And I think a lesson for everyone. And I think just this sense of this idea of this too shall pass. I think I mentioned to you offline that, I've remained friends with a lot of the people that I met. And as I've checked in with the monks in Lebanon to see how they're doing, they've said, well, it's a tumultuous time right now, but our monastery is from the 4th century, and we've had conflict here since then, and we've always survived. And this idea of we will get through these tumultuous times we have before, and we will again. And I definitely have been leaning on that message lately. Yeah. And I find that really valuable. But I saw that as well over and over again.
I think that's such an accurate philosophy for him in particular to take at this time.
Yeah,
that yes, this too shall pass.
We will get through it.
Yeah. It's just I have to say to my listeners that if you have a chance to get your hands on a copy of Elysian Kitchens, it is such a beautiful book. The photography, Kristen outdid herself. Kristen Teague,
she was
outdid herself on this, and
incredible.
Your descriptions of the experiences of you getting there, and then the people who were there and their lives is just it's so intriguing and so well put. And the recipes, the food. I mean, I didn't expect there to be so many recipes, and I didn't expect there to be such a variety, but absolutely delicious. But I just went into bread baking. You always think of you see the old pictures of the monks, and of course they're making beer. In the old days, beer, the best wine in the region. Back in the 1300s, came from the monastery, right?
Exactly.
And bread, but bread seems to be over, whether it's flatbreads or a leavened bread. Is that still? Is bread still such an important item that they?
I absolutely, as I mentioned, like the Johnny bread, the
Right, right.
Minnesota, but certainly, I think in Lebanon, it was more flatbreads that we
Hmm.
saw. And then, of course, at the Gurdwara in New Delhi, it was a lot of chapati production and naan production. But we saw bread everywhere. I love it's a different kind of bread, but it's called from Tikse, the Tibetan monastery. It's called tingmo, and
Hmm.
it's a kind of a fermented bun that's steamed, and it's got this kind of tangy flavor. It's very light, and they often serve it with shabda, which is a sweet and sour soup. Um, but that bread production, I make that recipe for myself all the time. It's just so satisfying, and those light steamed buns is really beautiful. And then, we haven't mentioned Ireland. And
Oh, right,
really,
right.
yes, having lived there, and that was another community. It was a convent, and I had lived nearby when I was living in Ireland to write my book there. And so I got to know those nuns, and they're amazing. And they have chocolate production there, and they too are so productive. And it's called Kylemore Abbey. And so if people have been to Ireland, it's probably a place you've been to. It's very touristy, but just an incredible community. And I mean, the bread production there was amazing. They're very proud of their award-winning scones, as they should be. There are recipes in the book for those.
Hmm. Yes.
But yeah, bread production, the soda bread there was incredible. But yeah. So I definitely saw that in almost every location. Certainly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, 'cause I had a memory years and years ago of being in this not so great restaurant. I had, we had to have something to eat on the side of Mount Vesuvius,
Oh,
and there
wow.
was nothing. Well, we could pour you some wine, run by these two little old ladies, but they weren't part of a monastery, nor was the restaurant. It just happened that there were some monks and other
Oh,
priests having lunch there. We
oh,
said, well,
that's nice.
please bring us some bread like that bread. Look at their bread they have on their table. They were sharing bread. And she goes, oh, no, no, no. Those monks, they brought their own bread. so,
I
so,
can so see that. I mean, I think that's how they still would.
yeah. So that stuck with me. I said, well, if you want good bread, you got to go to the monastery.
Exactly. Absolutely. I love
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Living in Portugal right now, oh my gosh, one thing that I can't get enough of are the convent suites here. Every convent has
Mm.
their own suites. I'm like, this is just incredible. But that's not in the book. Maybe
No.
the
Yeah. Oh, that's something to look forward to
yeah,
in Portugal. All
exactly.
right.
Exactly.
Portuguese sweets.
When you
Well,
visit,
Joe,
I'll take you there, Linda.
terrific. Thank you. Well, Jody, it was an absolute delight, as it always is.
As it
And
always
'cause
is.
I had forgotten to mention also about, because you're one of your books, I only mentioned a couple of your books, but I forgot to mention the recipes and stories from Ireland's Wild Atlantic Way. That's one of your books as well. Just a treasure of information in this book, both religious cultures and culinary cultures and the landscapes. Oh my goodness, they're just
Well, and
they always
that's Kristen. I mean, she's so incredible. I
yeah.
was so fortunate.
And these places seem to be located in areas that kind of aren't where you'd plan to build a big hotel or
Right,
or
right,
your house. I mean,
exactly. Pretty remote sometimes.
yes, remote areas and hard weather, often hard
Yes.
weather, and
Yeah, yeah,
so a real sense of survival there.
yeah.
Well, I congratulate you
Thank you,
on
Linda.
such a fine work, and look forward to cooking more of the recipes.
Oh,
And
good. I'm glad. I hope you
as I say,
enjoyed
I
the
encourage
network.
other people to do so as well.
Oh, thanks,
And
Linda.
Jody, I look forward to future work from you. It doesn't have to be a recipe book. It can be
Okay, all right. Great.
other explorations, and that you're right. And I always look forward to it. It's always a pleasure. Thank you
Always a
so
pleasure,
much.
Linda. Thank you so much.
And thank you for listening to A Taste of the Past. A Taste of the Past is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.